Hey everyone, welcome back to Corporate Decoder, the place where we unwrap the financial secrets of public companies, and boy do we have a gem for you today. We're diving into a report from T. Rowe Price about their Retirement Blend 2025 fund. Think of it as peeking under the hood of a retirement savings plan to see how it is doing. This report filed with the SEC is essentially a high-level checkup for the fund. It tells us how it performed and what it holds. We're going to cut through all the jargon and get to the juicy bits, focusing on what these numbers really mean for your potential retirement savings. First off, let's talk about the size of this fund. As of the 30th of November 2025, the Retirement Blend 2025 fund managed a whopping $880,020,000. That is nearly $1 billion in assets. This tells us it is a substantial fund managing significant money for its investors. Now, nobody likes paying fees, but they're a reality in investing. For the investor class of this fund, if you had a hypothetical $10,000 invested, the costs for the last 6 months were about $19. That is a small fraction, just 0.37%. For the I class, the costs were even lower, just $11 for that same $10,000 investment, coming in at 0.21%. These are relatively low costs, which is good to see, as high fees can really eat into your returns over time. This is an interesting number. The portfolio turnover rate is at 9.0%. This means that the fund managers bought and sold about 9% of the fund's holdings over the period. A lower turnover rate often suggests a more buy and hold strategy, which can sometimes lead to lower trading costs and potentially lower taxes for investors. It's not extremely low, but it's also not excessively high, indicating a balanced approach to managing the fund's investments. So, what exactly is this fund investing in? The asset allocation gives us a good picture. Roughly 40.4% is in domestic equity funds, meaning investments in US stocks. Then 29.5% is in domestic bond funds, which are US bonds, international equity funds, make up 14.7%. So stocks from other countries. And international bond funds are at 12.0%. The remaining 3.4% is in short-term and other investments. This shows a fairly balanced approach with a tilt towards stocks, which is typical for a retirement fund aiming for growth, especially one with a 2025 target date. It's diversified across different types of assets and geographies. Let's look at the biggest individual investments. The top holding is the T. Rowe Price Equity Index 500 Fund at 14.9%. This is essentially an investment that tracks the S&P 500. Then we see the T. Rowe Price QM US Bond Index Fund at 13.8% and the T. Rowe Price US Limited Duration Tips Index Fund at 10.0%. The rest of the top 10 are other T. Rowe Price branded funds covering international equities, hedged equities, value stocks, international bonds, growth stocks, real assets, and dynamic global bonds. What this tells us is that the Retirement Blend 2025 fund is largely investing in other T. Rowe Price mutual funds. This is a fund of funds, which is common for target date or blend funds. The managers are using these underlying funds to construct the overall portfolio. Now for the numbers that really show how the fund is doing, let's look at the investor class. For the 6 months ended the 30th of November 2025, the net asset value per S-share went from $10.31 to $11.26. That's a pretty solid increase. The total return for this 6-month period was 9.21%. That means if you had $100 invested, it grew to about $109.21 in just half a year. That is a good pace. Looking at the I class, the net asset value per S-share also saw a nice jump from $10.3 to $11.25. The total return for the I class in the same 6-month period was 9.22%. So both classes performed very similarly, which you'd expect as they represent different share classes of the same underlying fund. It is important to see how the fund is growing. For the investor class, the net assets at the end of the period were $200,021,000. This has grown from previous periods, indicating continued inflows or strong performance. For the I class, the net assets are even larger at $679,999,000. This is a significant amount of money, showing that this class is very popular, likely among institutions or larger investors. This section details exactly what the underlying funds hold. We're not going to go through every single line item, but it is broken down by bond funds and equity funds, and within those, specific T. Rowe Price funds. For instance, under bond funds, we see holdings like the QM US Bond Index Fund and International Bond Fund USD. Under equity funds, the Equity Index 500 Fund and International Equity Index Fund are prominent. This confirms what we saw in the asset allocation section. The fund is built with other T. Rowe Price Index and actively managed funds. This is a fascinating part because the Retirement Blend 2025 fund invests in other T. Rowe Price funds. These are considered affiliated companies. The report breaks down the gains and losses from these inter-fund transactions. For the 6 months ended the 30th of November 2025. There was a net realized loss of $425,000 from these affiliated transactions. However, there was a significant change in net unrealized gain of $56,450,000. This indicates that while there were some realized losses, the value of the underlying holdings within these affiliated funds increased substantially during the period, contributing positively to the overall performance. Looking at the balance sheet, the total assets were $889,315,000 and total liabilities were $9,295,000. This leaves net assets of $880,020,000, which matches what we saw earlier. The liabilities are relatively small compared to the assets. This is the income statement. For the 6 months ended the 30th of November 2025, the fund had investment income distributions from underlying funds of $10,427,000, after deducting investment management and administrative expenses of $935,000. The net investment income was $9,492,000. Then, when we look at the realized and unrealized gains and losses, the net realized loss on sales of underlying funds was $425,000, but the change in net unrealized gain was a strong $56,450,000. This all adds up to an increase in net assets from operations of $65,517,000 for that 6-month period. This statement shows how the net assets changed over time. For the 6 months ended the 30th of November 2025, the fund saw an increase of over $223 million in net assets, bringing the total to $880,020,000. This increase was driven by operations including those gains from the underlying funds and also by capital share transactions, meaning more money came into the fund through sales of shares than went out through redemptions. The notes to the financial statements provide crucial context. This fund is essentially a diversified portfolio of other T. Rowe Price stock and bond funds. Its asset mix will become more conservative over time, which is the hallmark of a target date fund as 2025 approaches. It aims for total return with an emphasis on both growth and income. Here, we see that purchases and sales of these underlying price funds for the 6 months ended the 30th of November 2025 were substantial, totaling $235,981,000 in purchases and $68,408,000 in sales. This indicates active management within the fund of fund structure. This section clarifies the relationship with T. Rowe Price. The fund is managed by T. Rowe Price Associates, Inc., and it invests in other T. Rowe Price funds. The fees are structured as an all-inclusive fee, which covers management and operating expenses, with the rate decreasing as the fund's stock exposure reduces along its glide path. For investor class, the fee was 0.37%, and for I class, it was 0.21%. These are pretty competitive expense ratios, especially for a managed fund. This general disclosure touches upon the unpredictable nature of global events, environmental, political, social, and economic. It acknowledges that things like natural disasters, conflicts, or public health crises can significantly impact the economy and markets, and thus the fund's performance. This is a standard but important reminder that investing always carries risks beyond the fund's direct control. So, what is the bottom line here? The Retirement Blend 2025 fund appears to be a well-managed, diversified fund of funds. It's showing solid performance for the reporting period, with good growth in net asset value and a positive total return. The expense ratios are competitive, and the strategy of investing in other T. Rowe Price funds allows for broad diversification. The fact that it is a blend fund designed to become more conservative as 2025 approaches is key for its intended audience. The underlying holdings are performing well, leading to strong unrealized gains, which bodes well for future performance. One thing to keep in mind is that since this fund invests in other T. Rowe Price funds, its performance is directly tied to the success of those underlying funds. The affiliated companies section demonstrates this, showing how gains and losses within those inter-fund investments have a direct impact. Overall, T. Rowe Price seems to be implementing its strategy effectively for this retirement-focused product. Alright, that is our deep dive into the Retirement Blend 2025 Fund's latest report. What is your take on these numbers and what they signal for the company's future? Drop your thoughts in the comments. If this analysis was valuable, hitting that like button really helps. And subscribe for more deep dives. Don't forget to check out the Discord in the description. Thanks for watching. See you next time.